Get out. That was all Claire said. 2 words. She didn't even look at her stepdaughter when she said them. She just reached across the seat, unclicked the seatbelt, pushed the door open, and waited. 8-year-old Emma Walker stood on the edge of that Montana highway with rain already soaking through her shoes, watching the taillights disappear around the bend. She didn't scream. She didn't chase the car. She just stood there, clutching the strap of her backpack, while the sky broke open above her. She was 8 years old. She was completely alone, and nobody was coming. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Emma Walker had been trying to be good for 2 years. 2 years of making her bed perfectly every morning before Claire could walk past the door and find something wrong with it. 2 years of eating whatever was put in front of her without complaining, of keeping her voice low, of disappearing into her room the moment she sensed the energy in the house beginning to shift. 2 years of learning to read the temperature of a room before she even walked into it, the way children learn to do when they understand, bone deep, without anyone telling them, that their comfort in a house depends entirely on not upsetting the wrong person. She was good at it, most days, but on the morning that everything fell apart, Emma wasn't thinking about being good. She was thinking about her mother. Her real mother, Rachel Walker, had died 26 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast. That was what her father Daniel had told her, sitting beside her on the edge of her bed the night after the funeral, his big hands folded in his lap like he didn't know what to do with them. It moved fast, Bug. There wasn't anything anybody could have done. Emma had nodded. She'd been 6 years old. She hadn't fully understood what nothing anybody could have done meant, but she understood that her mother wasn't in the house anymore, and that her father cried in the garage sometimes when he thought no one could hear him. She kept a photograph of her mother on the nightstand beside her bed. Rachel Walker, laughing at someone off camera, sunlight catching her blonde hair, the same shade as Emma's. Emma talked to that photograph every night before she went to sleep. She told her mother about school, about the birds she'd seen that day, about whatever book she was reading. It was something private and necessary, the one ritual she had left. She also drew flowers. Her mother had loved flowers. She'd kept a garden along the south side of the house, roses and marigolds, and something purple Emma could never remember the name of. The garden had died the winter after Rachel died, and Daniel didn't have the heart to replant it, and Claire had never asked. But Emma remembered those flowers the way she remembered her mother's voice, and her smell, and the particular way she laughed. So Emma drew them, on paper mostly, in her notebooks, in the margins of her homework, on the inside covers of her chapter books. But sometimes, when she was lost in thought, when she forgot to be careful, she drew them other places. She hadn't meant to draw on the hallway wall. That was the truth, and it was important to her, even if no one asked for it. She'd been sitting on the floor that morning in the hallway outside her room, her back against the wall, her knees pulled up, her crayons spread around her on the carpet. She'd been drawing in her notebook, a garden, a big, sprawling one with flowers taller than the people walking through them, and she'd gotten so absorbed in it that at some point, the crayon in her hand had drifted sideways. She'd drawn one flower on the wall. One. A simple thing, a circle of petals, a long green stem with 2 leaves, maybe 3 inches tall. And then, because it looked lonely there by itself, she'd drawn another one beside it. She wasn't thinking about what she was doing. She wasn't thinking at all, really. She was just in that quiet place where drawing took her, the place that felt close to her mother somehow. And by the time she came back to herself and realized what she'd done, there was a whole small garden blooming along the bottom of the hallway wall, in orange and yellow and pink and green. She stared at it. Her stomach dropped. She heard Claire's footsteps on the stairs. Emma. Claire Walker said her name the way you'd say the name of a broken thing you'd found. Flat. Containing. Emma stood up quickly, her crayons scattering. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll clean it off, You drew on the wall. It was an accident. I'll fix it, I'll get a cloth. You drew on my wall. Claire's voice didn't rise. That was the thing about Claire that had always frightened Emma more than yelling would have. She never raised her voice. She just got quieter and quieter until the air itself felt wrong. I just had that hallway repainted 3 weeks ago. You know that. I know, I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to. What are those supposed to be? Emma looked at the flowers. They're flowers. Mom used to. She stopped. She knew better than to say that. I like to draw flowers. Something passed across Claire's face. Something that wasn't quite emotion, but lived in the same neighborhood. Get your jacket, Claire said. Emma blinked. What? Put your jacket on. We're going for a drive. Emma had thought they were going to the hardware store, or maybe to the craft supply place so Claire could get something to repaint the wall. She thought it was going to be a silent, uncomfortable errand with a lecture at the end of it, and then a week of cold dinners and short answers, and the particular chill that settled over the house whenever Claire was punishing her for something. She did not think, she did not imagine, she could not have what was actually going to happen. She buckled her seatbelt in the back seat. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked out the window and watched the town give way to the flat, open highway heading east. And she told herself that whatever happened, she would be quiet and polite and apologize again as soon as Claire gave her an opening. They drove for 20 minutes without speaking. The radio wasn't on. The silence was the kind that had weight to it. Emma watched the mile markers pass. She recognized that they were getting farther from town, but told herself that was fine, that maybe they were going to a different store, that there was a reason for all of it that would make sense in a minute. Then Claire slowed the car. She pulled over on the shoulder of the highway, the engine still running, and she turned around in the driver's seat and looked at Emma with an expression that Emma had never seen on anyone's face before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even cruelty exactly. It was something worse than both of those things. It was indifference. Get out, Claire said. Emma didn't move. What? Get out of the car, Emma. But, Emma looked out the window. There was nothing out there. Fields, a stretch of asphalt going east and west until it curved and disappeared. A diner off the side of the road that looked like it hadn't been open in years. We're in the middle of nowhere. You want to act like you live in a barn, you can figure out what it feels like. Claire reached back and unclicked Emma's seatbelt. Out! Claire, please, now! Emma got out of the car. She didn't know why she did it. Later, much later, she would think about that moment and wonder why she hadn't refused, why she hadn't locked her door, why she hadn't screamed or cried or bargained more than that single please. But the truth was that children who have spent years learning to obey certain adults don't have a switch they can flip. They have instincts worn into grooves, and Emma's instinct said, comply. Don't make it worse. Do what the adult says and wait for things to go back to normal. She stood on the shoulder of the highway with her backpack in her hands, and she watched Claire's car pull back onto the road. She waited for it to slow down, to turn around, to come back. The car didn't slow down. It rounded the curve in the highway and disappeared. Emma stood there for a moment that felt enormous. Then she sat down. She sat down on the gravel shoulder of the highway, pulled her knees up to her chest, and she thought, very carefully and clearly, about what her options were. She could walk, but she didn't know how far it was back to town, and her sneakers were already letting in cold through a hole in the left toe. And the sky above her had turned a specific shade of gray that she recognized from living her whole life in Montana. That was a rain sky. That sky was going to open up. She could wait. That was the other option. She could wait for another car to come along, wait for someone to stop, wait for Claire to turn around, wait for her father to somehow know where she was and come find her. Her father. Emma's throat tightened. Her dad was in Wyoming. He'd left 3 days ago on a long-haul run. 2 weeks out, he'd said, maybe more. He wouldn't be home for another 11 days minimum. He had his phone, but he drove through stretches with no signal for hours at a time. And she didn't have a phone. She'd asked for one last Christmas, and Claire had said she was too young. She thought about her mom's photograph back on her nightstand. She thought about the flowers on the wall, still there, orange and pink and yellow, a whole garden growing in the hallway that no one would see now. The rain started. It started gentle, the way Montana rain sometimes does, just a soft sigh falling from the sky, the kind that makes you think it won't amount to much. But Emma had lived here long enough to know that was a lie. In 20 minutes it would be relentless. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out the one thing she always had in it, a battered paperback copy of Charlotte's Web that she checked out from the school library and renewed so many times the librarian had stopped asking for it back. She held it against her chest under her jacket to keep it dry, and she sat in the rain on the side of Highway 12, and she waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. She just knew that giving up felt wrong. 45 minutes passed. 3 cars went by. The first 2 didn't slow down at all. They were going 60, 70 miles an hour, the spray from their tires hitting the shoulder in a cold sheet. The third car slowed slightly. Emma stood up. She raised her hand. The car sped back up and disappeared. She sat back down. The rain was not gentle anymore. It came sideways, the way it does when the wind picks up off the mountains, and Emma's jacket was soaked through, and she was shivering in the specific, exhausted way you shiver when your body has been cold for a long time and has stopped even trying to pretend otherwise. She thought about crying. She'd already cried a little in the first few minutes, a brief and private kind of crying that she'd stopped quickly because it hadn't helped and because there was no one to hear it, and somehow that made it worse. But now, sitting in the full force of the rain, she felt a different kind of pressure behind her eyes. Not grief, exactly. Something quieter and more specific than grief. She felt the particular loneliness of a child who has just understood, for the first time, that the adult who was supposed to protect her had chosen not to. That was a particular kind of knowledge, and once you had it, you could not unhave it. Emma pressed Charlotte's Web harder against her chest. She looked east along the highway. She looked west. Both directions were empty. And then she heard it. It started so low she thought she was imagining it, a vibration more felt than heard, something that moved through the ground and up through the gravel and into her bones before it ever reached her ears. She straightened her back. She tilted her head. The sound grew. It was engines, multiple engines, more than she had ever heard together in one place, a deep mechanical roar that built and built until she could feel it in the back of her teeth, until the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, and the rain itself seemed to quiet in the face of it. She stood up. Around the curve of the highway to the west, something appeared. She saw the headlights first, dozens of them, paired beams cutting through the gray rain, and then she saw the bikes themselves, an enormous churning river of chrome and black leather filling both lanes of the highway, and at the front of it all, she saw a single rider, enormous, gray-bearded, moving at a steady, unhurried pace, like a man who had ridden enough miles that no road surprised him anymore. He saw her. She saw him see her. And the whole thundering river began to slow. Marcus Lawson, road name Bear, which he'd had for so long he answered to it faster than his given name, had been riding for 35 years. He'd ridden through blizzards and heat waves, and the particular miserable combination of both that Montana liked to produce in the same week. He'd ridden 200,000 miles on roads that didn't have names, and he'd seen most things a person could see from the seat of a motorcycle. He had never seen a child sitting alone on the shoulder of Highway 12 in the middle of a rainstorm. When he slowed, the riders behind him slowed too, not because they were following an order, but because in this brotherhood, you followed Bear's lead the way you followed gravity. It was just what you did. It was what they'd always done. Bear pulled his bike onto the shoulder. Behind him, 170 engines settled to an idle, then cut off one by one until the only sounds were the rain on the asphalt and the distant complaint of thunder moving east. He kicked his stand down. He climbed off the bike. He was a large man, 6'3", 260 pounds, and he knew how he looked. And he had spent most of his adult life watching people adjust to how he looked. He'd grown used to it. He didn't take it personally. But the girl on the shoulder of the highway didn't flinch when he walked toward her. She watched him come with eyes that were too steady, too old for 8 years old. The eyes of a child who had moved past the point of being scared of one more large thing in a day that had already been full of frightening things. Bear crouched down. He'd done this before, crouched down to talk to a child, gotten himself to eye level. He had grandkids. He knew that there was something about a grown adult towering over a small person that made communication harder than it needed to be. He looked at her directly. "Hey there, kiddo," he said. His voice was the kind of voice that came from a big chest, deep, rough at the edges, but not unkind. "You okay?" She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said simply. One word, delivered without drama, without performance, just a small girl in a soaked jacket telling the truth to a stranger because she had nothing left to lose by telling it. Bear held her gaze. Behind him, he could hear his brothers getting off their bikes, coming up quietly, giving distance but not leaving, the way they always did when Bear stopped for something. "What's your name?" he asked her. "Emma." "Emma," he said it like he was putting it somewhere safe. "How old are you?" 8. "Where are your parents, Emma?" And here was the moment. He watched her face move through something, a calculation, a decision, and then settle into a flatness that broke his heart a little, quietly, in the private place where Bear kept the things that broke his heart. "My stepmom left me here," she said, "and my dad doesn't know." Bear was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he straightened up slightly and turned his head just enough to catch Ryder's eye. Ryder Cole, who had ridden beside him for 22 years and who could read a look from Bear at 40 feet. The look Bear gave him now was clear. "Get the sheriff on the phone." Ryder was already reaching for his cell. Bear turned back to Emma. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Emma, I want you to know something." He waited until she was looking directly at him. "You're not alone anymore. You hear me? Not one more second." She studied his face for a moment, looking for the lie in it the way a child looks when they've been told something too good to simply accept. She didn't find a lie. Her chin moved, just slightly, the smallest possible nod. "Okay," she said, and somewhere, at the distant edge of the highway, thunder rolled and the rain came harder, and 170 men in leather stood in it without moving, and not one of them went anywhere. Nobody moved to leave. That was the first thing Emma noticed. She'd half expected the men to start their bikes again after a minute or two, to decide she wasn't their problem, to nod at each other the way adults nod when they've decided something is someone else's responsibility. But nobody moved. They stood in the rain like they'd been planted there, big men with water running off their jackets and down their beards, and not one of them looked like he had anywhere else he needed to be. A man with a red bandana tied around his wrist crouched beside Bear and held out a folded rain poncho. He didn't say anything. He just held it out toward Emma the way you'd offer something to a stray animal you didn't want to startle. She took it. "You got a name?" she asked him, because her mother had always told her to learn the names of the people who were kind to you. He blinked, clearly not expecting to be asked. "Ryder," he said. "Thank you, Ryder." He stood up quickly and turned away, but not before Emma caught the way his jaw worked, like he was chewing on something he couldn't quite swallow. Bear watched her put the poncho on. It swallowed her completely, came down past her knees, made her look like a child playing dress-up in a tent, and something moved behind his eyes that he kept off his face by long practice. "Emma," he said, "your dad, what's his name?" "Daniel Walker." And he's where right now? Wyoming. He drives trucks, long haul. She said it the way she'd explained it 100 times, without complaint, just fact. Her dad was gone a lot. That was how it was. He said he'd be back in 11 days. Bear absorbed that. You got a number for him? I know it by heart. She did. Her father had made her memorize it when she was 5. What if you ever need me and you don't have your phone? He'd told her. You find a phone somewhere, any phone, and you call me. She recited it now, steady and clear. Bear looked at Ryder. Ryder already had his phone out. Try him, Bear said. Then he turned back to Emma. Is there anyone else? Any family nearby? Emma thought about it seriously because she was the kind of child who gave serious thought to serious questions. My grandma lives in Billings, but she's got bad knees and she doesn't drive on the highway anymore. Okay. My Uncle Kevin is in Florida. Okay. And my teacher, Mrs. Anderson, she's nice, but I don't know her phone number. Bear almost smiled. That's all right, Bug. We'll figure it out. Behind them, Ryder held the phone to his ear. 10 seconds. 20. He met Bear's eyes and shook his head. Voicemail. Emma saw the exchange. Her face didn't crumble. She just got very still in the way she'd been still all afternoon. The practiced stillness of someone who had learned not to show the full weight of what she was feeling. But her hand tightened around Charlotte's web, pressed harder against her chest. He drives through areas with no signal sometimes, she said. Her voice was perfectly level. He might not get it for a while. We'll keep trying, Bear said. Can I? She stopped, started again. Can someone stay with me? While we wait? I don't. Another stop. She straightened her spine slightly, squared her shoulders in the enormous poncho. I don't really want to be by myself anymore today. Bear sat down on the gravel right beside her, all 6'3" of him, on the wet shoulder of the highway, rain coming down, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him sideways. You're going to get wet. I'm already wet. She considered this. Okay, she said, and she sat back down too. That was when the rest of them started moving, not toward their bikes, but toward the two of them. Quietly, without direction, like metal filings orienting toward a magnet. A man named Gus opened a saddlebag and produced a battered thermos. He poured something into the cap and handed it down to Emma. She sniffed it. Cocoa, Gus said. From this morning, it's still warm. She drank it in 3 long swallows and handed the cap back. Thank you, Gus. He stared at her. How'd you know my name? She pointed at the patch on his jacket. He looked down at it, then back at her, and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and something else that he covered with a cough. Another man offered crackers from a Ziploc bag. Emma took 2 and ate them carefully, like she was trying to make them last. A third man, young, maybe 25, with nervous hands, sat down cross-legged in the gravel a few feet away and pulled a harmonica from his pocket. He looked at it, looked at Emma. She was watching him with frank curiosity. Do you play? She asked. A little. Will you? He put it to his lips and played something slow and simple, something that sounded like it came from the kind of song you'd hear on a radio late at night when you were driving somewhere and couldn't sleep. It floated out over the rain in the idling quiet of the highway, and nobody said a word while it played. Emma sat beside Bear and listened with her eyes half closed. My mom used to sing, she said to no one in particular. Not real songs, just ones she made up. About whatever was happening, like if she was doing dishes, she'd make up a song about the dishes. Nobody responded. Nobody needed to. The harmonica kept playing. Bear said quietly, She sounds like she was something. She was, Emma said. Just that. No elaboration. Just the flat, absolute truth of it. 3 minutes later, Ryder tried Daniel Walker's number again. Again, voicemail. He left a message this time, calm, factual, identifying himself, giving the highway number, saying Emma was safe and asking Daniel to call back immediately on this number. When he hung up, he looked at Bear with an expression that asked what they did if Daniel didn't call back for hours. Bear's expression answered, "We stay until he does." Ryder nodded once. He'd been riding with Bear long enough that he hadn't actually needed to ask. That was when Emma looked up at Bear and said the thing that shifted the temperature of the entire afternoon. "She's done it before," Emma said. "Not this, not leaving me somewhere, but she's done other things." The harmonica stopped. Bear kept his voice even. "What kind of other things?" Emma pulled at a thread on the hem of the poncho. "She took my mom's necklace, the one with the little bird on it. My dad gave it to my mom when I was born. She said she threw it away because it was clutter, but I saw her wearing it once when she thought I was asleep." She paused. "I didn't say anything. I was going to tell my dad, but I didn't want to make things worse." Ryder, 3 feet away, went absolutely rigid. Gus turned and walked 6 paces in the other direction for no apparent reason. Bear said nothing for a moment. Then, "Emma, does your stepmother ever hurt you?" She looked at him directly. "Not like hitting, nothing like that. More like..." She searched for the word carefully, the way a child does when they're trying to say something true and don't want to be misunderstood. "Like she makes me feel like I'm a problem, like I'm something that's in the way of her life, like she'd be happier if I just..." She stopped, started again. "She told me once that my dad only kept me around because he felt guilty, that he would have moved on better without me." A beat. "I don't believe that. My dad loves me." But she said it. Nobody spoke. The rain was the only sound for a full 10 seconds. Then Ryder Cole, who had a daughter of his own, 14 years old, at home in Bozeman, Ryder Cole, who had never once in 22 years of riding, cried in front of another member of this brotherhood, turned around, walked to his bike, sat on it facing away from everyone, and stared at the horizon for a long moment. Bear watched him go. He understood. He felt the same thing moving through his own chest, a particular anger, the kind that doesn't burn hot but instead sits low and heavy and doesn't move. He looked at Emma. "Your dad needs to know all of this," Bear said. "I know." She said it without hesitation. "I was going to tell him when he got home, but I kept waiting for the right time." "There's never a right time for something like this. You just tell him." She nodded slowly. "Will you be there when I do?" Bear hadn't expected that question. He sat with it for a second. "If you want me there," he said finally, "I'll be there." She seemed to file that away somewhere important. 43 minutes after Bear first pulled his bike over, a sheriff's deputy named Carver came around the curve of the highway and slowed at the sight of what he found, which was, by any measure, not what he had been dispatched expecting. A child welfare call on Highway 12, the dispatcher had said. A child alone on the shoulder. Deputy Carver had been a deputy for 9 years. He had handled most things a rural Montana Sheriff's Department put in front of a person. He had not been prepared to find one small blonde girl in an oversized poncho sitting in the gravel next to one of the largest men he had ever seen in his life, surrounded by 170 bikers standing watch in the rain like an honor guard. He got out of his car slowly. Bear stood. "Deputy, she's okay. No injuries. Name's Emma Walker, 8 years old. Father's a long-haul driver currently in Wyoming. We've left voicemail but no callback yet. Stepmother dropped her here approximately an hour ago and left." Carver looked at Emma. "Is that true, sweetheart?" "Yes, sir," Emma said. He absorbed this for a moment, looking at the highway, at the bikes, at the 170 faces watching him with the patient, steady attention of men who had already decided what the right thing was and were waiting to see if he agreed. Then he crouched down in front of Emma. "Okay, I'm going to help you get to your dad. Does that sound all right?" "Yes, please." He straightened, reached for his radio. Bear stepped slightly closer to Carver and said, low, for the deputy's ears only, "She told us some other things, about the situation at home, about the stepmother. It's not just today. This has been going on. You're going to want to document that." Carver met his eyes, read what was in them. Understood. Ryder had come back from his bike by then, and he tried Daniel Walker's number one more time, and this time, on the second ring, someone picked up. The voice that came through was rough with road noise, the sound of a man driving somewhere flat and fast. "Hello? Who's this?" Ryder held the phone out to Emma. She took it with both hands, put it to her ear. "Daddy," she said. Just that word. One word. And whatever composure she had held together through the rain, and the waiting, and the crackers, and the harmonica, and the terrible small truths she had told to strangers, all of it came apart at once. She didn't wail. She didn't collapse. She just started crying in the way you cry when you've been holding something so tightly for so long that the moment you feel safe enough to let go, your hands stop working entirely. "Daddy, I need you to come home." And on the other end of the line, a truck driver in Wyoming went completely silent. Daniel Walker's voice came through the phone like a man who had just been hit by something he hadn't seen coming. "Emma." He said her name twice. The first time was a question. The second time was something else entirely. A sound that wasn't quite a word, more like a man's whole chest collapsing inward at once. "Emma, where are you? What happened? Why are you? Whose phone is this?" She was crying too hard to answer all of it at once. She pressed the phone against her ear with both hands and tried to find the words, but they kept breaking apart before she could get them out, and all that came through was fragments. "Highway. Claire. Left me. Rain. I waited, Daddy. I waited for a long time." Bear watched her from 2 feet away. He didn't reach for the phone. He didn't step in. He just stayed close, which was exactly the right thing, and he knew it. Ryder did not watch. He was looking at the ground, jaw tight, arms crossed. Deputy Carver had stepped back to his cruiser, but hadn't taken his eyes off Emma. On the phone, Daniel's voice had changed completely. The road-rough tiredness in it was gone, replaced by something stripped bare and immediate. Okay, baby, listen to me. Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she managed. "Some men found me, on the highway. They stayed with me." "What men? Who? Put one of them on. Right now, please." Emma lowered the phone and held it out to Bear without a word. He took it. "Mr. Walker, my name is Marcus Lawson. I ride with the Hells Angels Montana chapter. We came across your daughter on Highway 12, about 14 miles east of Garrison. She's been with us for almost an hour. She's physically okay. She's warm. She's had something to eat. But, sir, she needs you to come home." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Daniel Walker said, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very controlled in the way voices go when a person is keeping themselves together by sheer force of will, "What did Claire do?" Bear looked at Emma. She was watching him. He turned slightly away from her, lowered his voice by half. "She left her on the side of the road, sir, in the rain, over some crayon drawings on a wall." He paused. "Your daughter also told us some other things that go back further than today. I think you need to hear all of it directly from her, but I want you to know, today was not an isolated incident." Another silence, longer this time. When Daniel spoke again, something in him had shifted. You could hear it clearly even through the scratchy connection. A gear changing, something locking into place. "Where exactly are you? Give me the mile marker." Bear gave it to him. He heard the sound of a truck pulling over, an engine cutting off. "I'm in Rawlins," Daniel said. "Wyoming." That's a pause, and Bear could picture him doing the math, calculating roads, calculating hours, the way truckers always do, their minds already running the route before the conversation is over. "That's 11 hours, maybe 10 if the weather clears and I push it." "We'll make sure she's somewhere safe for the night," Bear said. "The deputy here is going to arrange a temporary placement. She'll be taken care of, Mr. Walker. You have my word on that." Your word. Daniel said it like he was tasting it, deciding if he trusted the flavor of it. Then, "Can I talk to her again?" Bear handed the phone back to Emma. She took it with steadier hands now. The worst of the crying had passed, the way the worst of a storm passes. Not gone, but moved through. "Daddy." "I'm coming," Daniel said. "I'm already looking at the map. I'm going to drive through the night, and I'll be there before you wake up tomorrow. Do you hear me?" "You don't have to drive all night." Emma Rose Walker. His voice broke on her middle name but held. "There is not a single thing on this earth that is going to slow me down tonight. Not one. You understand?" She understood. "Daddy?" Her voice dropped lower, not quite a whisper, but close. "She took Mom's necklace, the bird one. I saw her wearing it." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "I know," Daniel said finally. And the weight in those two words, the exhaustion, the grief, the guilt of a man who hadn't been home enough to see what was happening in his own house. That weight was enormous. "I know, baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Emma wiped her face with the back of her hand. "It's okay, Daddy." "It's not," he said, "but I'm going to fix it. I promise you I am going to fix it." She believed him. She'd always believed him. That had never been the problem. She handed the phone back to Ryder, who exchanged numbers with Daniel and promised to stay in contact through the night. When he hung up, Ryder slid the phone into his pocket and looked at Bear with an expression that said everything without saying anything. Bear nodded once. Deputy Carver came back from his cruiser with a notepad and crouched in front of Emma again, professional and gentle. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me everything you remember, okay? Take your time. There's no rush." She nodded. She answered every question he asked, clearly, in order, without exaggeration, and without leaving anything out. What time Claire had put her in the car, what they'd argued about, exactly what Claire had said, exactly what she'd done. The deputy wrote it all down with the focus of a man who understood that what he was writing mattered. When he asked about other incidents, things that had happened at home before today, Emma was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, just organizing. Then she told him about the necklace. She told him about the things Claire said, the ones designed not to leave marks, the ones aimed at the soft places in a child that adults can find when they choose to look. She told him about the January night Claire had locked the back door, and Emma had been outside for 40 minutes in the cold before a neighbor had seen her. She said, "I locked myself out." "I didn't. I never locked the back door." Deputy Carver's pen had slowed on the page. He was writing, but he was also listening in a different way now. The way you listen when something shifts from a bad situation into a documented one. Behind Emma, a man named Cal, 60s, a grandfather twice over, who had barely spoken since they'd stopped, said quietly to the man beside him, "She kept all of that inside her this whole time." The man beside him didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Carver finished his notes, stood, and spoke quietly to Bear for 2 minutes. Bear listened with his arms crossed and his face neutral. When Carver walked back to his cruiser to make calls, Bear returned to Emma. "You did real well," he said. "Telling him all of that? That took guts." She looked up at him. "Is guts the same as brave?" "Near enough." She considered that. "I didn't feel brave. I felt scared." "That's what brave is," Bear said. "Feeling scared and doing the thing anyway." She seemed to file that alongside everything else she'd filed away today in that quiet, interior space of hers. Then she said, without transition, in the way children move from one serious thing to another, "Are you going to get in trouble? For stopping? For being late wherever you were going?" Bear blinked. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, "We were heading back from a memorial ride. Nobody's expecting us at a particular time." "A memorial ride," she repeated. "For who?" "A brother of ours. Lost him last year. We ride every autumn to remember him." She thought about this. "I think he would have stopped too," she said. "If he were here, I think he would have stopped." Bear was quiet for a moment. Then he said roughly, "Yeah, he would have." Something passed between them in that silence. Something about loss, about the specific way people who have lost someone recognize that same particular weight in someone else, even across the enormous distance of age and experience. Emma felt it. Bear felt it. Neither of them named it. They didn't need to. That was when Carver came back, and what he said changed the shape of the afternoon. "I reached Claire Walker," he said to Bear, keeping his voice low. "She's at home. She claims Emma got out of the car voluntarily, says they pulled over because Emma was upset, and Emma opened the door herself and refused to get back in." Bear stared at him. "That's what she's saying," Carver confirmed. "She's also saying Emma has behavioral issues, that this isn't the first time Emma has acted out." He watched Bear's face. I know how it sounds. I'm telling you what she said because you need to know what we're dealing with." Emma was 6 feet away. She was watching a beetle moving along the edge of the gravel, with the absorbed focus of a child giving something small her full attention. She hadn't heard. Bear lowered his voice further. "Deputy, I have 170 witnesses who found that child alone on a highway in a rainstorm. Not standing beside a car, not throwing a fit, sitting in the gravel, alone, with a book, waiting. I know that. She wasn't performing. She wasn't acting out. She was waiting the way a child waits when they believe, truly believe, that someone might still come back for them." His voice stayed even, but the weight behind it was not even at all. "And that is the worst part of this whole thing, Deputy. She was still waiting for the woman to come back." Carver held his gaze. "I hear you," he said. "I'm documenting everything. Her father can speak to a family court attorney when he arrives. There's a family here in Garrison. Good people. They've done emergency foster placement before. They've agreed to take Emma tonight. She'll be safe. She'll have a bed and a hot meal and someone with her." Bear looked back at Emma. She had picked up the beetle carefully in her palm and was watching it walk across her fingers with an expression of pure, uncomplicated interest. The expression of a child who, even in the middle of the worst day of her life, could still find something worthy of attention in a small creature crossing her hand. He made a decision. "I'm going to tell her," he said, "about what Claire's saying. Not everything, not the details. But I won't let her hear it later from someone else and feel blindsided." Carver gave a short nod. "That's your call." Bear walked back to her. She set the beetle down in the gravel and watched it go. He crouched beside her. "Emma, I want to be straight with you about something, because I think you deserve that." She looked at him. "Okay. Your stepmother is telling the deputy a different version of what happened today. She's saying you got out of the car on your own." Emma's face went very still. "I didn't. I know you didn't. She's lying." "I know." Her jaw tightened, not with tears. She was past tears for now, with something harder and cleaner. "Nobody's going to believe her, are they? Over me?" Bear held her gaze. "You told the truth. The deputy wrote it down. Your father is on his way. And there are 170 people standing on this road right now who know exactly what they saw when they came around that curve." He paused. "The truth is on your side, Emma. It's going to stay there." She looked out at the rows of bikes, at the men still standing there in the fading rain, patient and unmoving. She looked at them for a long time. "Why did they all stay?" she asked. "They don't know me." Bear thought about how to answer that. He thought about the right words and decided the right words were just the true ones. "Because some things," he said, "you don't need to know a person to understand." She turned that over. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out Charlotte's Web, damp at the corners, the cover slightly wrinkled from the rain, and she held it against her chest the way she'd been holding it all afternoon, like a hand she could hold when there were no other hands available. "Okay," she said quietly, "I trust you." And Bear, who had not cried in a very long time, found something in his chest doing something it hadn't done in years. He stood up before it could show on his face. The Foster family's name was Hendricks. Jim and Carol, a couple in their 60s who had a small house on the edge of Garrison, with a guest room that had a patchwork quilt and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. Carol Hendricks had fostered 11 children over the years, which meant she knew, before Emma even walked through the door, not to make a fuss, not to hug too hard, not to ask too many questions at once. She just took Emma's wet jacket, hung it by the heater, put a bowl of tomato soup in front of her, and sat across the table like she had nowhere else to be. Emma ate the soup. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Before Bear had let Carver's car pull away with Emma inside it, he'd crouched at the window and looked at her directly. "I'm going to call you tomorrow morning, early, and your dad will be there before you wake up. I promise you that." He tapped the door twice with his knuckle. "You did good today. Every single part of it." She'd pressed her hand flat against the glass for just a second. Not waving, just contact. The way you reach for something solid when the ground hasn't fully stopped moving. Bear had stood in the road and watched the cruiser until its taillights disappeared. Then he'd turned around, and Ryder was right there. "What do you need?" Ryder asked. "I need someone tracking Daniel Walker's drive," Bear said. "Call him every 2 hours. Make sure he's awake. Make sure he's moving. A man driving 11 hours through the night on that kind of news, someone needs to be checking on him." Ryder nodded. "I got it. And I need to know the minute Carver files that report. Whatever charge, whatever outcome, I want to know." "Done," Ryder paused. "Bear, what she said about the necklace, about Claire wearing it. Yeah, that's not a woman who made a mistake today. That's a woman who made a choice. A long time ago." Bear said nothing. He didn't need to. They both knew what it was. They'd both been around long enough to know the difference between a person who lost their temper and a person who had decided, quietly and deliberately, that a child wasn't worth the space she took up. They mounted their bikes in silence. One by one, 170 engines started. The sound of it rolled out across the empty highway like a tide coming in, enormous and certain. Bear sat for a moment with his hands on the handlebars before he started his own engine. He thought about Emma pressing her palm against that car window. He thought about the way she'd said, "I trust you." Not desperately, not as a child clinging to a stranger, but quietly, with the same careful consideration she brought to everything. Like she'd waited and decided it was true. He started his engine. He rode. But he didn't sleep that night. He lay on the motel bed in Garrison because he hadn't been about to put 300 miles between himself and this town. Not tonight. And he stared at the ceiling and thought about the things Emma had told Deputy Carver. The locked door in January. The necklace. The words Claire had said about Daniel keeping Emma out of guilt. Saying those things to an 8-year-old. He thought about his own daughter, grown now, with kids of her own. He thought about what he would have felt if anyone had said those things to her when she was 8. He examined that feeling for a while, held it up and looked at it, and then he set it down carefully, because if he let himself sit inside it too long, it would turn into something he couldn't use. At 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed. Ryder. "Talk to Daniel. He's in Billings, making good time. He sounds like a man who is barely holding himself together. Is he safe to drive?" "He says he is." He pulled over for coffee. He asked about Emma. I told him everything we knew. He didn't say much, just kept saying, "Okay, okay," like he was trying to absorb it all, one piece at a time. "He's going to fall apart when he sees her," Bear said. "He's going to hold it together until he sees her, and then it's going to break." "Yeah," Ryder said, "probably. That's all right. That's what's supposed to happen." He hung up and lay back down, and this time, eventually, slept. Daniel Walker arrived at the Hendricks house at 4:47 in the morning. He'd driven 10 hours and 50 minutes, and he'd stopped twice, once for gas, once for coffee, and the rest of the time he'd simply moved, because moving was the only thing his body knew how to do with what was inside him. He'd spent the first 2 hours on the phone. Ryder, then the deputy, then his brother Kevin in Florida, then his mother in Billings, then Ryder again. After that, he'd turned everything off except the GPS and driven in silence and let the silence do what it needed to do. He knocked on the Hendricks door at 4:46. Carol answered it before the second knock because she'd been sitting in the kitchen since 3, unable to sleep, which was something she didn't tell him. She took one look at Daniel Walker, unshaven, red-eyed, still in the clothes he'd been wearing in Wyoming the morning before, and stepped aside without a word. He walked in. Emma was asleep on the couch in the living room. Carol had moved her there around midnight when the girl had fallen asleep at the kitchen table mid-sentence, still telling Carol about the harmonica player in the Beatles she'd found. She was on her side, the patchwork quilt pulled up to her chin, Charlotte's Web face down on the cushion beside her. Her blonde hair was still slightly damp at the ends from the rain. Daniel stood in the doorway of that living room for a long moment. He didn't go to her right away. He just looked at her. His daughter, breathing slowly, safe, whole. And something moved through him that wasn't quite relief, and wasn't quite grief, and wasn't quite rage, but contained pieces of all three. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. His shoulders moved once. Just once. Then he crossed the room quietly and sat on the edge of the couch and put his hand very gently on the top of her head. Emma's eyes opened. She looked at him. She didn't make a sound for 3 full seconds, the way you don't when what you're seeing is something you stop fully believing would happen. Then she sat up and went into his arms so fast she nearly knocked him off the couch. He caught her. He held her against his chest with both arms, and his face pressed into her hair, and he didn't say anything at all because there were no words built for this. For a father holding a daughter he drove through the night to reach, a daughter who had sat alone in the rain and waited for someone, anyone, to see her. Emma cried. Daniel cried. Carol Hendricks, who had fostered 11 children and thought she was past being undone by things, stood in the hallway with her hand over her mouth and her eyes closed. After a while, neither of them could have said how long, Emma pulled back slightly and looked at her father's face. She reached up and touched his jaw with her small hand, the way she used to when she was very small, checking that he was real. "You look terrible," she said. He laughed. A broken, exhausted, completely genuine laugh. "I drove all night, Bug." "I know. You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, "I did." She leaned back against him. He kept his arms around her. "Daddy," she said into his shirt, "I need to tell you everything. Not just what I told the deputy. Everything. The whole 2 years." He was quiet for a moment. His jaw tightened, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I know, and I want to hear it. Every word." A pause. "I'm not going anywhere." She told him. It took an hour. Carol brought coffee for Daniel and warm milk for Emma, and then made herself absent because what happened in that living room belonged to the two of them alone. Emma told it all in the careful, sequential way she did everything. Starting at the beginning, the week after their wedding, the first time Claire had said something that made Emma feel like a wrong answer to a question nobody asked. She told it without drama and without exaggeration. She told it the way she told the deputy, but with more, with the interior parts, the parts you don't tell a stranger in the rain. The nights she'd lain awake constructing arguments in her head for why Claire was probably just stressed, probably just adjusting, probably didn't mean it the way it sounded. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. He did not fill the pauses. He did not say, "I had no idea," or "I wish you'd told me sooner." Because those sentences, however true, would have made it about him. He just listened, the way he should have been home more often to listen, and he held that knowledge about himself the same way you hold something hot, carefully, without looking away from it. When Emma finished, the sky through the Hendricks window had started its shift from black to the deep blue that comes just before dawn. Daniel said, "I'm going to fix this. You said that on the phone. I mean it more now. He looked at her directly. Claire is not coming back into our house. Not for her things. Not for anything. Not when you're there. Do you understand me? Emma studied him. Are you going to get divorced? Yes. She processed this. Good, she said simply. And then before he could respond, can we plant Mom's garden again? In the spring? I know where she kept all her notes about what she planted where. Daniel stared at his daughter. This child, who had been left on a highway in the rain, who had sat in a rainstorm for over an hour alone, who had told her story to strangers and deputies and a foster family without falling apart, this child was asking about her mother's garden. Yeah, he said rough. We'll plant it. I want the purple ones. I can't remember what they're called. Lavender. Lavender, she repeated, like she was memorizing it again. Okay. Bear called at 7:15 in the morning. Daniel answered. His voice was steadier now, still wrecked at the edges, but the particular hollow quality of a man running on fear had been replaced by something more solid. Mr. Walker, Bear said, you made it. I made it. A pause. I'm not a man who has a lot of words for things, usually, but I don't know how to say what. He stopped, started again. You stayed with my daughter. In the rain. All of you. You didn't know her. You didn't know me. You had no reason. We had every reason, Bear said. I want to meet you, Daniel said. In person. I want to shake your hand. Then we'll make that happen. Bear paused. How is she? Daniel looked across the Hendricks living room to where Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, telling Carol in patient detail about the correct way to press flowers between books, using hand gestures for emphasis. She's going to be okay, he said. She's stronger than I knew. She's stronger than most people I've ever met, Bear said, and I've met a lot of people. After he hung up, Bear sat with his phone in his hand and thought about that. About the things that reveal what a person is made of. Not the big dramatic moments that people expect to define them, but the small interior ones. The decision to keep waiting when you have every reason to stop. The choice to tell the truth when lying would be easier. The ability to ask for help. Really ask, not perform it, when you are 8 years old and alone and the sky is falling and a stranger is crouching down to meet your eyes. That was who Emma Walker was. He hoped she knew it. He suspected she didn't yet, not fully, that it would take years for her to understand what that afternoon had actually demonstrated about her own character. But she would get there. That afternoon, before Bear rode out of Garrison, he stopped at a gas station and bought the only stuffed animal they had, a large brown bear, clearly intended for a much younger child, with a red ribbon around its neck. He rode to the Hendricks house and knocked on the door. Emma answered it herself. She looked up at him, then at the bear, then back at him. She didn't say anything cute about it. She just took it with both hands and held it the same way she'd held Charlotte's web, against her chest, like something worth keeping. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Bear nodded once. He was about to say something. He had something prepared, something about being okay, about things getting better from here. But Emma spoke first. The man who you did the memorial ride for, she said. What was his name? Bear blinked. Tommy. Tommy Briggs. Emma nodded seriously. I think Tommy would have liked me, she said. I think we would have been friends. Bear stood on that doorstep for a moment, completely unable to speak. Yeah, he managed finally. I think he would have loved you, kid. She seemed satisfied with that. She held the door open wider. Do you want to come in? Carol made pancakes. There's a lot. He laughed. A real one, startled out of him, the kind that felt good in the chest. Yeah, he said. Okay. He came in. He sat at Carol Hendricks's kitchen table next to Emma Walker. A biker and a small girl and a foster grandmother and a long-haul driver, all eating pancakes at 7:30 in the morning while the sun finally broke through. And for a while, there was nothing complicated about any of it. Just people around a table. Just breakfast. The pancakes were gone by 8 o'clock, and by 9, Daniel Walker had shaken Bear's hand at Carol Hendricks's front door. A long handshake, the kind between two men who have no common language except the one that doesn't need words. Daniel was not a demonstrative man. He'd grown up in a family where you showed people you cared about them by showing up, by working, by staying. He didn't hug easily. He didn't emote in front of strangers. He hugged Bear anyway. Bear let him. He stood there on Carol's front step and let this exhausted truck driver from Montana hold on for a moment. And he didn't say anything, and he didn't pat him on the back the way you do when you're trying to signal that it's time to let go. He just stood there until Daniel was ready. When Daniel stepped back, his eyes were red, but his jaw was set. "I'm going to handle what comes next," he said. "The legal part, the divorce, all of it." "Good," Bear said. "She's going to say Emma made it up. Claire, she's going to build a whole story." "She's already started," Bear said. "We know that. The deputy knows that. And Daniel, 170 people have already written statements. I made sure of that last night. Every man who was on that road wrote down exactly what he saw when we came around that curve." He let that land. "She can say whatever she wants. She's saying it into a wall." Daniel stared at him. "You had them write statements?" "Last night, before anyone left Garrison, Ryder organized it." Bear shrugged, like it was an obvious thing, like it was nothing. "We've dealt with courts before. We know how this goes. You document everything, or you lose the argument." Daniel put his hand over his mouth for a moment, looked at the ground, looked back up. "I don't know how to. I can't." "You don't have to," Bear said. "Just take care of your daughter. That's the only thing you need to do from here." Emma appeared in the doorway behind her father, the stuffed bear tucked under one arm, Charlotte's Web under the other. She looked at Bear. "Are you leaving now?" "I need to get back," he said, "but I told you I'd call." "You did." She stepped out onto the step beside her father. The morning was cold and clear, the storm entirely gone. The sky the specific blue that comes after rain in Montana, sharp and clean all the way to the mountains. She squinted into the light. "Bear. Yeah, when you ride, when you go on trips with everyone, do you ever come through Garrison again?" He looked at her. "We do." She nodded like she was confirming something she'd already suspected. "Then I'll see you again." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a hope. It was simply a fact she had decided, stated in the same calm tone she used for all facts. Bear felt something move in his chest, that familiar press behind the sternum he'd been noticing since yesterday. "Yeah, Emma," he said, "you will." He walked to his bike. He put on his helmet. He started the engine. And before he pulled away, he looked back once, at the door of that small house, at a man and his daughter standing side by side in the morning light. And he thought about Tommy Briggs, who had been the kind of man who would have ridden at the front of that column and pulled over without hesitation and sat in the gravel, rain-soaked beside a strange child, and never once considered doing anything else. He thought about how grief travels with you everywhere you ride, in the back of everything, the permanent passenger, but how sometimes the road puts something in your path that makes you understand why you're still on it. He rode. The legal proceedings began 11 days later, and they were not clean or simple, because they never are. Claire Walker hired an attorney who was good at his job, which meant the first 6 weeks were a rotation of motions and counter-motions and a custody evaluation that required Emma to sit in a room with a court-appointed psychologist and answer questions for 2 hours while Daniel waited outside in a hallway and tried not to put his fist through a wall. Emma handled the evaluation the way she handled everything, directly, precisely, without embellishment. The psychologist, a woman named Dr. Farouk, who had done hundreds of these evaluations, told her supervisor afterward that in 20 years she had never interviewed a child Emma's age who was so clear about the difference between what she knew and what she felt and what she could prove. She kept saying, "I don't want to exaggerate. I want to tell you exactly what happened," Dr. Farouk said, 8 years old. The evaluator's report was 42 pages. Claire's attorney challenged it. That was when the statements arrived. Ryder Cole had organized them with the same methodical attention he brought to everything. 170 signed declarations, each one describing what the writer had seen when they came around the bend of Highway 12 on that Tuesday afternoon in October. What the road had looked like, what the weather had been, how Emma had been positioned when they found her, how long they had been there, what she had said. The declarations were specific and factual, and they were identical in every detail that mattered, because the truth is always consistent with itself in ways that fabrication is not. Claire's attorney read them and went quiet for 3 days. On the 4th day, he called Daniel's attorney and began discussing terms. Daniel was in the parking lot outside the attorney's office when he got the call, and afterward he sat in his truck for 10 minutes doing nothing before he called Bear. "The charges are going through," Daniel said, "child abandonment, and there are 2 additional charges from what Emma told the deputy, emotional abuse." The district attorney picked it up. Bear was quiet for a moment. "And the divorce? She's not contesting it anymore." Daniel's voice had an unfamiliar quality, not happy, not triumphant, just the flat, specific relief of someone who has been braced for a blow that finally didn't come. She wants it done. She wants to move to Bozeman, and she wants it done quickly. "And the necklace?" A pause. That was the part that got her. Her own attorney advised her to return it. Apparently, once the abandonment charge attached, her credibility on everything else went with it. It came back yesterday in a padded envelope. No note. Bear said nothing. "Emma doesn't know yet," Daniel said. "I'm going to give it to her tonight. I'm going to put it around her neck myself." He stopped. His voice shifted in a way that suggested he was working hard to keep it level. "Rachel would have, my wife would have," he stopped again. "She would have been proud of Emma," Bear said, "and she would have been grateful to you for coming home." The silence on the line stretched long enough that it became its own kind of conversation. "Bear," Daniel said finally, "she asked me last night if you could come to her birthday. It's in March." Bear leaned back. He looked at the ceiling of his garage where he'd taken the call, at the familiar grease-stained landscape of it, at the photograph tacked above the workbench. Tommy Briggs, laughing, sunburned, 17 years ago on a road in New Mexico. "When in March?" he said. "The 14th. I'll be there. She'll want to know if the others are coming too." Bear smiled, a real one, slow and unhurried. "I'll ask around." He asked around. He sent one message to the chapter group at 9 o'clock that night. By 10:30, 163 men had responded yes. 4 were out of state and couldn't make the drive. 3 had work conflicts they tried unsuccessfully to reschedule. The remaining 163 cleared their calendars for the 14th of March without discussion, without deliberation, without anyone needing to explain why. Emma Walker turned 9 on a Saturday. She woke up to the sound her father called the most beautiful and terrifying noise in Montana, which was the sound of 163 motorcycles coming up the road toward their house. She ran to the window in her pajamas. She pressed her face against the glass. She saw them coming, and she could not speak for a moment. Daniel stood behind her with his coffee cup. "Happy birthday, Bug." She turned around and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not the careful composure she'd carried through the worst months. Not the practiced smallness she'd developed under Claire's roof. Not even the brave, deliberate openness she'd shown a stranger in the rain. This was something unguarded and enormous. This was a child who had just been shown something unexpected about the world and had not yet had time to protect herself from how good it felt. "They came," she said. "They came." "All of them?" "Most of them." She turned back to the window. Then she turned back to him. Then she turned back to the window. Then she said, in a voice that didn't sound like the Emma who chose every word carefully. "I need to get dressed right now, immediately." He laughed so hard he had to put down his coffee. Bear was at the front of the line. He brought a card, the same format as the one from October, white envelope, simple card inside, but this one had 163 signatures in it, because they'd passed it around the night before at the motel in Garrison, where they'd all stayed, and some of the signatures had notes beside them. Ryder had written 3 words, "Toughest kid, period." Gus had drawn a small cartoon thermos next to his name. The harmonica player, his name was Pete, Emma had learned this eventually, had drawn a tiny harmonica. When Emma opened the card, she read every single signature, all 163. She sat at the kitchen table with her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration and worked through it methodically, which took 11 minutes, during which approximately 8 bikers standing in Daniel Walker's living room found things on the ceiling to look at very intently. Then she looked up and said, "I know some of these people, from last time." "Yeah," Bear said. "They remember you too." Pete played harmonica. Pete, from across the room. "I did. Will you play again?" He pulled the harmonica from his jacket before she'd finished asking. Someone moved the furniture. Emma sat on the kitchen counter swinging her legs, and Pete played, and a room full of leather-clad men stood around a 9-year-old girl's kitchen and listened. And outside the window, Daniel Walker's neighbor from 3 houses down stood in her yard with her phone in her hand, recording it, and would later upload the video to a local Facebook group with the caption simply, "This happened today in Garrison." The video was shared 11,000 times by Monday morning, but that came later. In the moment, there was only the kitchen and the music and the people in it, and Emma Walker in her birthday sweater, yellow with small embroidered daisies along the collar, chosen specifically because it was the most festive thing she owned, with her mother's bird necklace around her neck. Daniel had given it to her the week before, on a Tuesday evening after dinner. He'd come to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and held out the necklace in his palm without preamble. Emma had looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Then she'd looked at her father. "How?" she said. "It came back." She reached out and picked it up by the chain, held the small silver bird up where she could see it. The bird was mid-flight, wings spread, caught at the precise moment of lifting off from something. Her mother had worn it every day. Emma remembered the weight of it resting against her mother's collarbone when she leaned in to hug her. "Claire had it," Emma said. "I know. She lied about it. I know." Emma looked at him. "Are you angry?" "Yes," he said without hesitation, because she was 9 years old and she had earned the truth. She nodded slowly. "Me too, but not the same as I was." She turned the necklace in her fingers. "Can you put it on me?" He fastened it around her neck with hands that were not quite steady. She went to look in the mirror, touched the bird with one finger, stood there for a moment the way you stand when you are doing something that belongs to more than one time at once. "It fits," she said. "Yeah," Daniel said, "it does." She wore it to her birthday party. She wore it the first day back at school in November, and her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, noticed it immediately and said it was beautiful. And Emma said, "Thank you, my mom had it." And Mrs. Anderson said, "Your mom sounds like she had wonderful taste." And Emma said she did. She really did. She wore it to her first meeting with the family court advocate assigned to her case. She wore it to the preliminary hearing where Claire Walker entered a guilty plea on 1 count of child abandonment and accepted a suspended sentence, probation, and a permanent protective order, keeping her away from Emma and Daniel. Emma was not in the courtroom for the plea. Daniel had offered her the choice, and she'd thought about it seriously and said, "I don't think I need to see that. I already know what happened." Which was, her attorney told Daniel quietly afterward, one of the most emotionally healthy things he'd heard a child say in 20 years of family law. At the birthday party, Bear stayed until late afternoon. He helped Daniel move the furniture back. He washed dishes without being asked, standing at Carol Hendrick's sink. Carol had come to the party because Carol came to everything now. She was simply part of what their life had become. And Carol stood beside him drying, and they talked about nothing important. Roads, weather, her grandkids in Missoula, his daughter in Billings. The comfortable talk of people who have been brought together by something large and stayed connected by something quieter. Emma found Bear in the kitchen before he left. She'd been doing the rounds, saying goodbye to each person individually, because that was the kind of child she was. She stood in front of him with the stuffed bear under her arm, the gas station bear, the one with the red ribbon, because she'd brought it out for the party and intended to keep bringing it out for every significant occasion, she had decided. "Bear," she said. "Emma, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" She looked up at him with those eyes that were always a little older than the rest of her. "You stopped because you saw me, but you almost didn't, right? I was small. I was far off the road. You could have just driven past." He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I saw something on the side of the road and I slowed down. And when I got close enough, I saw it was a child alone. And then there was no question." "But the slowing down part," she said, "that was the important part." He looked at her. "Most people don't slow down," she said. It wasn't self-pity, it was observation, the same precise, unsentimental way she observed everything. "Most cars went past me, 3 cars, and they didn't slow down." She paused. "But you did. So I've been thinking that the most important thing isn't what you do when you already know someone needs help. It's whether you slow down long enough to see it." Bear stood in Daniel Walker's kitchen on a Saturday in March and let a 9-year-old rearrange something in his chest. "That's right," he said. "That's exactly right." She seemed satisfied. She held out the stuffed bear. "Will you hold him for the picture? Dad wants to take a picture of all of us before you leave." He took the bear. He held it with the same matter-of-fact care she'd handed it over with. Daniel came in with his phone and rounded everyone up. Bear and Emma and Ryder and Pete and Gus and Carol Hendricks and 11 other bikers still finishing the last of the birthday cake. And they crowded into the living room, and someone propped the phone against a stack of books, and they took the picture. In it, Bear is in the center, enormous as ever, the red ribbon bear tucked under his arm. Emma stands directly beside him, one hand wrapped around 3 of his fingers, the bird necklace catching the light, her chin lifted, her eyes open and direct and unafraid. She is smiling, not the careful, private smile she'd had before, not the compressed expression of a child managing the distance between what she feels and what she shows. A real one, wide and unguarded and entirely, completely hers. Daniel printed that photograph and framed it. He hung it in the hallway, in the exact spot where the crayon flowers had been. The flowers that started everything, the orange and yellow and pink garden Emma had drawn for her mother on a morning when she forgot, just for a moment, to be careful. He painted over those walls eventually, fresh white, clean start, but he hung the photograph at the center of that wall, and whenever Emma walked past it, she touched the frame lightly with 2 fingers, the same way she'd pressed her hand to the car window that rainy October afternoon. Not waving, not performing anything, just making contact with something real. She kept drawing flowers. She filled sketchbooks with them, whole, wild, sprawling gardens that spilled off the edges of the pages. In March, she and her father planted the first seeds of Rachel Walker's garden along the south side of the house, following the notes her mother had kept in a small green notebook. What went where? How deep? How far apart? Which ones needed shade? Which ones turned toward the sun? Emma knew the purple ones were lavender. She said the word carefully each time, like something worth keeping in your mouth. By May, the first green things were pushing through the soil. Emma crouched in the garden on a Saturday morning, her hands in the dirt, her necklace swinging forward as she leaned down to look. She stayed like that for a long time, just watching the new plants, just being there with them, unhurried and present, and at home in a way that had nothing to do with walls or roofs or whose name was on the deed. She was 9 years old. She had been abandoned by one person and found by 170 others. She had lost her mother and kept her close anyway, in flowers and photographs, and the small silver bird resting against her collarbone. She had been told she was a problem and discovered she was a person, fully, stubbornly, unquestionably a person. And she had told the truth in a rainstorm to strangers who listened. And the truth had held, and she had held, and the world had turned out to contain more people worth trusting than she had been led to believe. She pressed both hands flat into the earth beside the new lavender, feeling the cold and the damp, and the particular solidity of ground that is ready to grow something. She looked up at the sky. It was enormous and blue and entirely clear. Some people are abandoned, some people are found. And some rare, fierce, quiet people, even at 8 years old, even in the rain, even alone, refuse to stop believing that the road will not stay empty forever. Emma Walker was always going to be one of those people. She just needed someone to slow down long enough to show her she was right.